Hey everyone, my name is Mike Beachy. I'm in sales here at HubSpot. Welcome to Inbound Sales 2016. Today, I'm joined by CEO of HubSpot, Brian Halligan, and we're going to be talking about inbound sales and how HubSpot's leading the charge. Thanks for joining me, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So Brian, you started your career in the 90s at PTC. You've been in sales a long time. Talk about some of the changes you've seen happen in your time in sales.
Yeah, a lot has changed. Let's talk about the telephone, Mike. In the 1990s, everyone had a phone on your desk, and when you called them, something very interesting happened. The phone rang on their desk, they didn't know who it was from, they picked it up and they answered. Now, if I roll the clock forward to the 2000s, kind of 2000, 2010, let's say 10 years ago, big change. You called them, they had a phone on their desk, and it rang, but then a thing on there showed who was calling, caller ID. And unless it was someone they knew, like their mom or their sister, or somebody, their boss, they typically wouldn't pick it up. Fast forward to today, big change afoot. Fewer and fewer people even have a phone on their desk. And so that, to me, that's the first big change I've seen. So the whole process of cold calling your way and filling your funnel with cold calls, gosh, we're great in the 90s. In fact, every Tuesday it was cold calling day at my company. I worked at PTC. But every Tuesday, I'd show up in the office, cold call my brains out, fill my funnel for the rest of the week. Everyone had a phone on their desk. No one had caller ID. People actually picked up the phone. It was an awesome thing. You think about 2006, they still had a phone on their desk, but they had caller ID, so it worked less well. 2016, gosh, fewer and fewer people actually even have a darn phone on their desk. That's a key play for my career. It just completely doesn't work. The second thing is, back in 1996, email was a new thing. There was no such thing as spam protection. There was no filtering, there was no folders, there was none of that. So pretty much every email you sent, somebody opened the darn email and would respond to you and gave it to you. That's the first big change I've seen. It's just the whole act of the way you prospect. Gosh, it's not totally dead, but it's getting near dead. That cold email prospecting, cold calling, it's large. And I think of it's bad for the rep, because it's like, take a lot of time cold calling, cold emailing. It's just like a rough way to live your life. It's bad for that rep's brand, because you're like pounding in with these cold messages, and eventually that just drives the prospect crazy. So that's the first big shift I've seen since the 90s.
It's amazing to hear you reflect on it. When I started my career in insurance sales, we used to have cold call nights, and it was Tuesday night. We would get a pizza and rip out a page of the white papers, and that was how we did it.
Totally.
So Brian, you've been doing this really interesting research project.
Yeah.
You've been understanding how people who buy things are actually doing it today.
Yeah.
What have you been learning?
Okay. The research project has been fascinating. And so what I do, I've done it for about 15 people, is I go to people who buy a lot of stuff. And I've done it inside of HubSpot, and I've done it with a bunch of other companies. I'll go and I'll get very tight, sit in the cubicle of the person who's the buyer. So for example, I'll go and visit the CIO of whatever company, sit in the cubicle with them, and I'll watch how they behave, right? And fascinating. Most of these people who buy a lot of stuff, they don't have a phone on their desk, which is kind of interesting when you think like most sales reps spend half their lives cold calling. Second of all, their email, they have it folderized in such a way that it's nearly impossible for you to get a cold email in front of them, and they're largely ignoring it. And then I look at their use of social, and I look how they use their mobile devices, and I'm like an anthropologist digging into a buyer's life. Now, a couple of ahas. My first aha on cold calling is buyers of stuff get a lot of them. Rarely does the sales process start with a cold call, if ever. I haven't found one recently that starts with a cold call. Cold calls, if you've got a phone on your desk, you've got caller ID, these buyers aren't picking up the phone. Most of them didn't have a phone on the desk, goes into voicemail, and they're just deleting the calls. In my 2 cents, cold calls are dead. They're pretty much dead. My second aha, once in a great while, a buyer will buy something that started with an email from a rep. But there's two things about emailings from reps that I've noticed through these buyers. First, the only emails that work are ones that are highly contextualized, where that seller has done a bunch of research and is hitting the nail on the head with their with their email. My second aha, and this is probably bad news for many of you listening, is emails from brands that are famous. Let's say Cisco or you name it, even HubSpot. Much more likely to be open than emails from brands you've never heard of. So cold email from a brand no one's heard of is largely a waste of time. Warm email from a brand people have heard of with rich context has a prayer of working. That still works. Okay, that's my first thing that I've learned in this research project. My second thing that I've learned that's been fascinating is more the rep's role in the purchasing process has changed a lot. In fact, in most of the things these buyers buy, the rep gets involved pretty late in the process. And if it were a baseball game, the rep gets involved in the 5th or 6th inning. Rarely does the rep get involved in the 1st or 2nd. Most of the convincing in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th inning is done by the marketing department and by your existing customers, by your references talking to each other. They all have informal networks and they talk to each other. The rep gets involved late. The rep's role isn't to prospect anymore. The rep's role is to really understand what's going on in that prospect's mind, what their pain is, what the problems are, and really crafting the key solution for them. So the rep gets involved late. The rep's really important in the buying process, but the rep's role is to be the smart solution seller that it's less aggressive, less prospector, more smart solution seller. So I've learned a lot. It's been a fascinating project, Mike.
Incredible. What do you think that modern salespeople are doing to really adapt to that change today? What have you seen?
I haven't seen much. I still see people cold calling their brains out, and I think that's bad for the rep because, gosh, it's not a productive way to spend your day. It's bad for the company that the rep works for because it's rough on the brand. Keep calling that same person, it's rough. So that whole cold calling thing in the presence of the phone, that's the first change I've seen. The other big change I've noticed, more of a macro change, is the power seems to have shifted from the rep to the buyer. So when I think of the 1990s when I was selling PTC, I, as the rep, I had all of the power, Mike. I had 100% of the control of the process. I started with the cold call, people picked up the phone. And then from the very top of the funnel to the very bottom, I had the upper hand in the relationship. If that prospect wanted to talk to my CEO, well, I'll do that, but it's going to be quid pro quo. If that prospect wanted product specs, well, they had to come to me and ask and I'd get something in return. If they wanted a reference, well, they had to come to me. Everything they wanted to come to me, they had to come through me. Today, that's totally changed. All of the power's in the hands of the prospects. There's been a big power shift that's happened. That's the other big shift I've seen. The top of the funnel has really changed, and how you interact with it. It's really hard to interrupt your way into somebody's life. The second big change is power shift between the buyer and the seller. It's dramatic shifts in how people, I think people have to dramatically change the way they sell to match the way humans actually buy.
I agree. I think HubSpot's really done a lot to evangelize this term inbound sales. We've started to talk about what it means to sell in an inbound way. You know, when you think of a salesperson and what they actually do different to be successful today, what are the things that they're doing and what are the tactics that they're leaving behind?
Yeah, I think the cold call is one thing they're leaving behind. I think the cold email largely they should leave behind. When I interview buyers today, I notice, well, that phone situation shifts. The other big change I've noticed is that cold email coming in, people have filters on their email systems. People have spam. It's just hard to reach people. So that's another play I think they need to leave behind. The sales reps need to do a much better job of understanding the prospect, doing a lot of research, gaining a lot of context about what the problems that prospect and that company are dealing with, and then really contextualizing the conversation and trying to add real value. The value is around context, understanding the problems, crafting your solution to match that. So I think that the rep's role has changed from just a prospector and a very aggressive to much more of a helping them understand your product, how it maps into your pain, and then really being a solution seller and using context to that. So the sales rep's life has really changed a lot.
Makes sense. As a salesperson who's trying to come into a new career in sales or evolve their career in sales, tactically, what should they do different? What should they change?
Yeah. First of all, I think the profile of the rep 10 years ago was the number one criteria was aggressive. You need to be a door opener and aggressive and tough. I think it's largely shifted from aggressive being the key criteria, to smart. You need smart, thoughtful reps, because the rep traditionally gets involved at the top of the sales process, top of the funnel, and manages that prospect through. Today, most of the research today, most of the selling is done by your website, by the prospects themselves. They can find it so much from Google and your website. The rep gets involved later. And so the job of the rep is less about the tenacious, aggressive prospect, and much more about the very smart, very savvy, understanding your business, really getting a handle on what your problems are, and then crafting your message contextually to hit the nail on the head when you have a sales call. And so reps have to change their behavior a lot. The profile of the rep, I think, is changing a lot today as well.
For the companies that aren't marketing their businesses as successfully as, say, HubSpot is, how do you think salespeople should be changing the way that they go about prospecting?
Sure. So if I were to prospect, rather than send 100 cold emails a day, I would do my research on those 2 or 3 people who are perfectly in my target market, find people who are connected to them, get introductions to them, and when I finally email my way into them, I would have done a ton of research on what their problems are, what their latest press releases are, management changes, strategic initiatives, all of that stuff before I even engage with that prospect. So research up front is really key, and it's about quality, not quantity today. I'll just take myself. I get 10, 12 cold calls a day, never listen to the voicemails. I get 30 or 40 cold emails a day. Once in a while, I will open an email if it's highly contextualized, if that rep really understood and did some research. So that's the key. Context, research, understanding, that really works today.
So Brian,
Yeah.
how do you see the sales software space overall evolving? How do you see sales software really change?
Yes, sales software is a very good question. Sales software changed a lot. When I think of CRM, and I've bought CRM many times in my career, CRM was really invented for the VP of sales to track what's going on, and it largely has worked. So long as the VP of sales can whip the sales reps hard enough in getting the input information into the system, it works well. The way I think it's starting to change is what people really want today isn't so much software to track what's going on. They want the tracking to be a byproduct of the seller selling. What they want is software to help that sales rep sell more stuff in the first place. They want software to enable that sales rep to sell in a way that is a magical experience for the end buyer. How do you make that sales process much better? That's the way I see it evolving. Less as a tracking system that humans have to input stuff in, more as a system to enable that sales rep to really hit the nail on the head with the prospect and do all the tracking stuff as a byproduct of their work in email and phone and social media.
I completely agree, and that's very consistent with what we're hearing on the phones.
Yep.
How do you think HubSpot's really helping to move us to that place?
I think HubSpot does two things. It kind of maps into what I was just talking about. First of all, it's built from the ground up to enable the seller to sell in a way that matches the way the buyer wants to buy, enables that seller to sell more effectively, enables that seller to create massive context and really hit the nail on the head. The second way it's different is we don't make that sales rep do any data entry. All of the data entry is really done by the software. So I'm sending an email to my prospect that's automatically pushed into the CRM. As news happens about my prospect, it's automatically filtered into the CRM. So the CRM is sort of an output of all these other things going on. So HubSpot sales software is very unique. It's a whole new type of software, very different than traditional CRM, built from the ground up to help that sales rep sell.